Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Seattle Public Library is on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. I also want to say that the Seattle Public Library stands in solidarity with the members of our community who are advocating for anti-racist practices in government and protesting against the continued oppression of Black people in America. This event is sponsored by the Seattle Public Library Foundation, author series sponsor Gary Kunis, and media sponsor Seattle Times, and presented in partnership with Elliott Bay Book Company, Seattle City of Literature, and Penguin Random House. You can buy signed copies of Devolution at Elliott Bay Book Company, and they offer curbside and delivery through mail. You can go to www.elliottbaybook.com. This program is being recorded and will be available later on the library's YouTube channel with captioning for accessibility. When you entered this Zoom event, you may have seen that it said that it would be recorded, just reminding you of that. And so we are looking forward. We were so looking forward to having Max here in this building, which is why I had to come to the Central Library in honor. We had planned to have this event in May. The book got pushed to being published just a couple days ago. And we're thrilled that you could join us tonight remotely to talk about the book that is set here in our own Pacific Northwest and discuss the fascinating topics of Sasquatch, zombies, and other monsters. There will be a Q&A portion of the event, and you can submit your questions in the Q&A tab. I will share your questions with Mr. Brooks. Please let us know if you want to be credited for your questions or if you want to remain anonymous. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And to the introduction. As a best-selling author, Max Brooks is credited with helping propel zombie lore from the niche subculture fascination to mainstream pop culture obsession. While Brooks has published 3 massively successful zombie-themed books, The Zombie Survival Guide, World War Z, and The Zombie Survival Guide, Recorded Attacks, all of which are now considered definitive tomes in the genre, Brooks's ultimate goal was to challenge old ways of thinking and encourage mental agility and flexibility for problem solvers and leaders. Brooks's unique, unconventional thinking depicted in his books has even inspired the US military to examine how they may respond to potential crises in the future. World War Z was read and discussed by the sitting chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Brooks has been invited to speak at a variety of military engagements, from the Naval War College, to the FEMA hurricane drill at San Antonio, to the nuclear vibrant response war game. Adapting to adversity has been the enduring theme in all of Brooks's work, and we need that now more than ever. His new novel, Devolution, a first-hand account of the Rainier Sasquatch massacre, is a horror tale that blurs the lines between human and beast and asks, what are we capable of when we're cut off from society? Set in the wilds of Washington State, Green Loop was once a model eco-community until nature's wrath made it a tragic object lesson in civilization's fragility. But I will let Max Brooks tell you more. Please welcome Max Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be beamed into the Pacific Northwest, into Bigfoot's backyard. This was actually where I was originally planning on launching the book. I was going to go to Emerald City Con, and obviously everything changed. Then we had this pandemic, and we had to shut everything down, and for really good reason, because this was not a hoax. This was something we had to take seriously. And it's along the lines of what I want to talk to you about tonight, which is monsters. Why are we fascinated by them, and what can we learn from monster stories? To which my answer initially is very simple. We can learn whatever we desire to teach through stories about monsters. When we discuss this pandemic that we're facing now, and you will hear people in power say things like, well, we didn't know this was going to happen. This was just, oh boy, we really got blindsided. There's no plan for this. There's no plan for this. That is not true at all. Here's the plan. This is called the National Response Framework, and this is the government's master disaster plan. So when something like COVID-19 hits, everybody from the White House down to your local sheriff, even the local indigenous tribal councils, all have instructions on how to keep everybody safe. Big stuff, big lessons. And the question is, how do you teach something like that? Because the truth is, nobody's going to read this. This is either going to put people to sleep or it's going to scare them off. This has been the problem that I have found in the last, I don't know, decade or so, that I've started to run in military and national security circles. There is a huge disconnect between the American people and those who protect them. And they don't talk to each other anymore. How do we heal this rift? How do we do what is called wholeness of nation? So when there's a crisis that threatens all of us, we all respond. But how do you educate the voters, people like us, people who are not in government, people who don't understand this stuff, and why would we? So how do we get interested? Well, the answer is simple, but not easy. You tell them a story. You educate through entertainment. And that's what I've been trying to do since Zombie Survival Guide. Zombie Survival Guide was essentially just a disaster manual. But if I had written just an earthquake prep manual, nobody would have read it. So I went back to something that I was genuinely afraid of, which was zombies. I've been afraid of them since I was a kid. And I started to think, what would I do if there was a real zombie plague? And I really started to think about it. What if this was real? And I put all my OCD into this and my love of learning. And I started to tackle the zombie survival question as if it was real. Nobody's going to come to save me. There's no magic bullet. There's no uber hero, with great hair. Real life. And so what I came out with at the end was an actual disaster preparedness manual. And that was the case with my next book, World War Z, which was, if there was a zombie plague, if there was a zombie pandemic, how would systems survive? In the first book, it was small. How do an individual survive? This was big. How do nations survive? How do governments survive? How would different nations cope? So I tackled that from a realistic point of view. And just like with my first book, I did years of research, real facts, fictional problem, factual solution. And in doing that, I studied the history of real pandemics. So when COVID-19 hit and people were coming to me and saying, did you predict this? I was like, no, I didn't predict anything. I just studied the history of pandemics that happen to come about in very predictable cycles. So even though the zombies were fake, the response and also the systems that they would attack are all very real. That's what we can learn from monster stories. If done right, a monster story can teach us about this world in a way that circumvents what I call the ego defense mechanism. I mean, I call it that because that's what it's called. I didn't make that up. The ego defense mechanism are the nerve guards in our brain. Just like if you put your finger next to a fire, the nerves say, hey, that hurts, out. Ego defense mechanism shuts us down so we don't get too traumatized and scared by things. And that's why when you're learning about things that are too real, like a real pandemic, you tend to shy away from it. Well, that's not entirely cowardice. That's your psyche protecting itself. So the way to get around that and learn about the things we have to learn is you make the threat fictional, like zombies. Now, I am not the first person to do this, obviously. Using monsters to tell real stories, to teach real lessons, is as old as the stories themselves, as the idea of sitting around a campfire, talking to each other. So I didn't make anything up. I didn't invent anything. Even in the zombie genre, the Center for Disease Control used to have a great zombie website, How to Survive a Zombie Attack. Now, obviously, they weren't just fooling around. They were trying to teach us about how to protect ourselves when a real pandemic comes. And if the site had been supported by the rest of the government, we would have had, I think, a much more educated population. So that's what I do. I take a fictional threat, I imagine that it's real, and in studying it and studying the solutions, I learn how to solve real problems. And that is no different than devolution. I will just tell you the story quickly, for those who haven't read it, little, synopsis. The story begins with a very high-tech, high-end eco-community set in the Cascade Mountains. And I got to say, just as a pause, it's so nice to be talking to people from the Pacific Northwest, so I don't have to explain what this terrain looks like. This eco-community is right at the edge of the mountains, right up there in the wilderness, far enough to get away from everything. And these are not dirty, filthy hippies who are living off the grid. They are the grid. This is top of the line technology that allows these people to live with all the comforts of the Upper East Side of Manhattan, but being in beautiful natural surroundings. So they get up every day, and their smart homes tell them if there's anything wrong with the house. And if there is, smart home sends a signal down to the town. The maintenance crew comes in their driverless electric vans to fix it. So do the gardeners, so do domestics. But these people can telecommute to work, and then they can tap on their phones and get their drones to deliver groceries from Amazon, from Whole Foods. And it really is the best of all worlds. What is more American than having it all? Until Mount Rainier erupts. And that eruption cuts them off completely. But it's a lot worse than that, because the eruption goes in the direction of Seattle and Tacoma. And so even though they are outside the blast zone, even though they are technically safe, they're not just cut off, they're forgotten. And winter is coming. And these are not rural people. These are not survivalists. These are urbanites at the top of the pyramid. And these highly educated, highly paid, civilized David Sedaris fans don't know how to change a light bulb. And they only got about a week or so of groceries left. And so they need to dig in and find a way to survive, because if they don't get found before winter comes, they're going to starve. And that's the least of their problems, because the volcano has also driven a pack of very large, very hungry Sasquatch creatures out of the wilderness. And they're hungry too. And they need to stock up on calories for the winter. And they come up against this little eco community, which to them amounts to a pen of sheep. So if you were going to boil down devolution into one sentence, it would be Ira Glass and Fran Lebowitz versus Bigfoot. Now, why not just write a Mount Rainier eruption book? Why put Bigfoot in? Well, starting with the heart, I've been scared of Bigfoot since I was 6 years old. I've always wanted to write a Bigfoot book. But I realized when thinking about this story, I could use a Sasquatch attack as a way to talk about very real things, like the fact that Mount Rainier is going to erupt someday. As with all my work, I did a ton of research with this. And as a matter of fact, I used the USGS map of where the lahars, the rivers of boiling mud and rocks, are going to go. And using that as a guide, I figured out where to put Green Loop. So that is a great way to talk about natural disasters and all the systems we have in place, like early warning and disaster preparedness and information, trusting in the experts to avoid panic. And if you don't, what that panic could do. Because these are all real things we need to talk about when disasters hit. Most people don't actually die in disasters. They die in second and third order effects. And we've built ourselves since the 40s a great safety net, but it's being eroded. So I wanted to tackle that. And I also wanted to tackle how to live in harmony with nature, because as an urbanite and as a concerned environmentalist who wants to preserve this planet, this fragile little biosphere for my son and hopefully his children, what makes me frightened and frustrated is when people from the city try to anthropomorphize nature and they don't respect it. Because when you go out there, when you leave your four walls and you go into nature's world, you obey her rules. You're a guest in her house. You don't try to put your rules on it. And to me, that's a great way to talk about Sasquatch, because I didn't want to do anything supernatural. I didn't want to portray Sasquatch as gentle giants. I also didn't want to portray them as vicious beasts that are evil, because good and evil, that's a human concept. I just wanted to write about them as animals, like anything else. And failing to understand them and failing to respect their way of life is what gets our characters into a lot of trouble, because I have studied copious amounts of animal attacks, and that usually is the problem. People who don't understand animals thinking they can put their rule book on them, and that's when trouble happens. So all these things I was trying to tackle. Also technology. In the work I've done for the military, I've gone to a lot of tech conferences and seen the mega trends where they're going, and I can tell you, we are racing to try to build a world based on comfort and not resilience. There's no backup plan. There's no backup system, because that's expensive and nobody wants to pay for that. So when this beautiful, wonderful technology fails, what are we going to do? Because we're becoming more and more dependent on it every minute of every day, but we're not thinking about what could go wrong. So over-reliance on technology, eroding our safety systems in a disaster, and failing to respect nature are the themes I wanted to tackle. So I took them all and put them into the vessel of Sasquatch. And that is devolution. And that is why, to me, if done correctly, I'm not saying that I've done it correctly, but if someone else does it, a monster tale can be some of the greatest teaching tools that we have. I'm sick and tired of hearing myself talk. I would love to open the floor to questions. So whatever you want to ask, go ahead. And if you haven't read the book yet, of course, I mean, the book just came out. So whatever you want to ask, I am here for you.
All right, Max, we have quite a few questions to get you started. Right. Our first comes from Danny. How does coming from comedy royalty influence your work in horror and supernatural? What are the parallels?
Well, I'll tell you, Danny, coming from comedy royalty has nothing to do with who I am, but it did make me have to fight a lot harder. And I can tell you, coming from comedy royalty almost killed my career before it was out of the gate, because when Zombie Survival Guide first came out, I had just left Saturday Night Live. So nobody knew who I was. And my publisher tried to position the Zombie Survival Guide as a comedy book, because they thought, well, you're Mel Brooks's kid, so we'll position you as Mel Brooks Jr., and you won an Emmy for your work on Saturday Night Live, which is not really true. We all won an Emmy. I happen to be on the team. Me winning an Emmy is like saying my dad won World War II because he was there. But they positioned it as Emmy award-winning comedy writer and son of comedy legend Mel Brooks has new satire book on zombies. And I tried to warn them. I said, that is going to destroy this book before anybody has a chance to really read it, because the comedy people are going to read it and say, this is not funny. And the horror people, my people, who don't know me yet, are going to think that Mel Brooks's brat is taking a giant dump on everything that they love. And that's exactly what happened. I got a review in the LA Times. It was terrible, and rightfully so. They said this is the least funny book ever written, to which my answer was yes. And the horror fans hated it. So thank God I was able to take their marketing plan and throw it away and market myself. And I owe my wife for this, because she said, look, you know who you are. Go to the horror people. And I did. And I went to Fangoria and I did my first interview, and I got to tell my side of the story. And I started to do zombie lectures. But yeah, it's always good to be funny in any situation. I mean, I do national security forums, and I'm still able to get people to laugh. You should see what I did for the U.S. Army's Training and Doctrine Command Mad Scientist Forum, where we talked about megatrends. It was all serious. And I got up, and I had a lot of serious stuff to say, but I opened with a joke, because one guy kept blowing his nose like an elephant. And I said, stand up. We've been hearing you for 3 days. I want everyone to know who this is. And it laughed, broke the ice. So comedy was always good in my zombie lectures, but underneath it were the real lessons of survival. So comedy is a great tool in any situation to use. But for me, being positioned as a comedian was almost fatal. So I'm very grateful that I managed to climb out of that hole and position myself in a truthful manner, which is a novelist who can sometimes be funny, but has a lot of serious things to talk about.
Excellent. Our next question comes from Tyler. Why did you decide to have a chapter where you criticize yourself, the zombie survival guide, and World War Z?
Oh, I think a little bit of self-deprecation never hurts. I mean, I don't think I had a whole chapter criticizing myself, but I give it a few jabs. I think that I'm flawed. I'm human. I make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not beating up on myself. But you are who you are. So I think that that's totally fine. Because also I try very hard not to believe my press, either good or bad. Just as a side note, everyone, if you write something on Amazon, I'm sorry, I won't be reading it. I have a pact with my wife who's threatened to divorce me if I read any reviews or any comments about the book. But yeah, back to your question. I mean, what's wrong with poking a little fun at yourself? That's all right. Next question.
An anonymous asker says, I can't wait to read your book. In your Bigfoot researches, did you have the chance to read The Psychic Sasquatch and Their UFO Connection? I think you'd love it. It explains everything.
Yes, anonymous. First of all, I've heard of your work. I see you all the time with the mask. And anyway, anonymous. Yes, I've read Psychic Sasquatch and the UFO Connection, and I stay very far away from that. Like I said, I did research the lore of Sasquatch. In fact, I've been researching it since I was 6 years old. My God. Everybody else in college was talking about Marcel Proust, and I was talking about Grover Krantz. So, however, getting back to what I said in my intro, I tried to stay within the limits of pure biology. The premise is that there is a species of great ape in North America. Nothing more, nothing less. And so those were my guidelines for how do they eat? How do they live? What is their social interaction? How would they have avoided humanity for so long? And what would make them dangerous to humans? So those were my guidelines. And I had to be very strict with that. Misha, next question.
Nicole asks, would you ever collaborate with your dad on a book?
Well, Nicole, that's a good question. The problem is my dad's not a novelist any more than I'm a comedian. So we really don't have that much to collaborate on. That's why I was so happy to do this PSA. Nicole, I don't know if you saw this, but when COVID-19 really hit and we started to lock everything down, and when certain people in power were still calling it a hoax, I wanted to get the message through to people that it wasn't just about you getting infected, because you still hear this. You still hear people saying, well, I'm young and I'm strong and it's not going to matter if I get it. I'll have some flu-like symptoms and I'll get over it. No, that's not enough. You could infect someone else. And that was driving me crazy. So, but how do I do that? Do I just record a rant like now? That's going to turn people off. It's going to trip their defenses. They're going to be like, yeah, whatever. Do I write some long op-ed? Yeah, that's going to be read by people who read op-eds and no one else. So I thought, what if I just make it personal about me and my dad? I'm 48 now, but when I made it, I was 47. My dad's 93. If I get it, I'd probably statistically be okay. But if I infect him, and this is where the comedy comes in, if I give it to him, he could give it to Carl Reiner, who could give it to Dick Van Dyke. And before I know it, I've wiped out a whole generation of comedic legends. So I thought of that, and I shot a video with my dad, and I was on one side of his glass wall, and he was on the other side. And we did a little public service announcement, and it was funny, but it was true. That's where humor comes in. And that was the first time since the 9th grade high school cabaret that I have collaborated with my dad. Because I've always wanted to, but we're such different animals. But when talking about COVID-19, that was the perfect moment for a father and son to work together. Misha, next question.
The next question comes from Eric. Can you speak to the recent or last decade or so trend in monster fiction to domesticate the monster and make them viable love interests? I'm thinking specifically of iZombie, Warm Bodies, the Twilight series, the Southern Vampire Mystery series, etc. Do you think Sasquatch will eventually go that direction? Why are we trying to date the monster?
Oh God, Eric, that's way above my pay grade. Let me just say, and this is not beating up on myself, I have no idea why other creators do what they do, and I have no idea what's going to hit with the public. I really don't. I mean, this goes to why I write. I write for me because I really don't know, and some writers do, and God bless them. I'm super jealous. Some writers, they know the zeitgeist and they know what's popular and they can spot trends and they go, bam, that's hot. I'm going to write about that. I could never do that. All I can do is write about the things that I'm passionate about, because that way it also insulates me from failure. Because if you don't like it, but I like it, well, at least it's got one fan. So that's time well spent. If I was going to try to answer your question about sort of why we're trying to domesticate monsters, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why people do that. I would never do that. The Twilight series, I wouldn't go anywhere near that. Warm Bodies, good for them. But it's not where I go naturally. I have to follow my passion. I have to follow my natural internal wiring. So for me, I'm not into that. In the same way that I even turn off a lot of zombie fans, because there is a section of zombie enthusiasts who think that like a zombie plague would be awesome, because then they would get to be the alpha that they always knew they would, and they would get their assault rifle and unlimited ammo, and then when the system collapses, they will rise from the ashes. To which I would say, you'll be dead in a year. You'll be dead in a year from infection, from dehydration, from a lump you find because there's not going to be any more oncologists, from other diseases, because once herd immunity goes away, and all these other diseases that we've kept at bay since the 1940s are going to come roaring back. Anyone who thinks that they are going to become the alpha leader of a post-zombie society need look no farther than the average life expectancy of a Somali warlord. But that's how I feel, and I can actually back that up with facts. But a lot of people don't feel that way. So I really don't know. I don't know what possessed people to domesticate monsters. I mean, Sasquatch, they've already domesticated. A long time ago, remember they did Harry and the Hendersons, which was sort of cute and fuzzy. No, thank you, not me. And wasn't there like some really conservative politician who was into like Bigfoot porn? Or he called it like Bigfoot erotica. There was like a series of like Bigfoot sex books. I seem to remember hearing about this. I'm not going anywhere near that. So all I can tell you is I wish I was a trend spotter, but I just write for me. Misha, what else we got?
Questions are rolling in. They are enthralled. Okay, our next question is from Alejandro. What is your process of writing a story? Do you know how it starts and how it ends? If yes, how do you create these, these obstacles or events in the middle to keep it interesting for the reader to keep reading?
Let me give you just a little peek into how I write. I start with a simple question, like what if zombies were real? Or what if Bigfoot was real? That's it, question. And then I set out to answer that question. And once I start to do that, I dig into research. What if Bigfoot was real? How would a real Bigfoot attack happen? And my research these are just a few of the books, just a few that I have read when it comes to Sasquatch. Because for me, research is critical. My hero growing up was Tom Clancy. And I should also just backtrack a little bit, saying that someone who suffers from dyslexia, I didn't do very well in school. So I loved being educated by my entertainment. And I've always tried to do the same. So I research from certain angles. Part of it is books. Part of it is talking to experts. Like with the Mount Rainier eruption, that kind of research changed the whole book. Because initially I thought Rainier was going to blow like Mount St. Helens and it would just be a massive explosion and ash falling from the sky. And then I talked to volcanologists who said, no, Rainier and St. Helens, completely different volcanoes. The danger of Rainier would be the lahars, all of that snow and ice on top of it liquefying and causing molten rivers, just boiling rivers of mud and boulders racing down the valleys, which is exactly what happened in Armero, Colombia. So once I do all that research, I start to write outlines. And see these whiteboards? These are my questions. And I start to write all my outlines out. And sometimes they're broad and sometimes they're teeny tiny detailed. And the final piece of my research, which is really important, is hands-on. Now, I will tell you this, and this is important for you folks from the Pacific Northwest. I know exactly where Green Loop would be because I used the map and then I looked at the terrain on 3D satellite imagery and I put where I thought it was going to be. But then I actually had to physically go, specifically because of you people, not anybody else in America. My nightmare scenario was coming to Seattle and standing before you, and one of you standing up and saying, listen, in your chapter, and the volcano erupts and you have your little town meeting and they say, why can't we walk out? And then and one of your other characters says, well, the terrain is too punishing, we can't walk out. Well, I'm from that area and I can tell you, sir, we can walk out of there just fine. That was the nightmare. So I had to physically go and hike to where I would have put Green Loop to see if I could hike out. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, you can't even hike in. That is some punishing, brutal terrain. Even an expert hiker with the right tools and the right skills would have to be very careful. And if you're these people, these urbanites who've never set one foot off their padded hiking trail, they would never survive. So that's, but I'm going to tell you where it is because I don't want anybody going up there and hurting themselves. One other thing, and this is just between all of us, you got to promise me not to try this at home. A lot of things I had to do with hands-on was recreate some of the situations that I did in the book. I won't spoil it too much, but a lot of it is, can they plant a survival garden? So I had to do that without going to the gardening store and getting dedicated seeds, using like dried beans and whatever seeds out of fruits, whatever was in my pantry, to see if they could do it. And then I had to keep a calendar right here on my whiteboard. So that way I could make sure that the chronology of events was in line with what was happening to those plants, so it was accurate. And there's a chapter where my character has to make weapons with very little. Could I physically do that? Because I didn't want somebody to say, listen, I tried, it can't be done. Well, I can tell you, it can be done. I've done it. So I hope that that answers your question a little bit about my writing process. Rachel, what else we got?
Yes, I tried to get a good picture of you with that axe in your hand. I don't know how well I succeeded. Okay. Our next question is from Alex. What about Bigfoot do you find the most terrifying?
Oh, I think, honestly, I think the base nature, which is kind of the reasons I'm scared of zombies. You know, there was that great scene in Jaws when Richard Dreyfuss says, listen, this is an eating machine. All it does is swim and eat and make little sharks. And that's it. That terrifies me because I am a rational person. I believe in reason. I believe in dialogue. I believe in trying to work something out. And coming up against an enemy that I didn't declare war on, that I can't negotiate with, that I can't find common ground with, that I can't coexist with in any way, because it does not have the ability to do that. An enemy, an adversary that is following sheer biological instinct is absolutely terrifying, because then I have no choice but to meet it on that level and deal with it on that basic animal plane. Is terrifying. So that to me is scary. And obviously it's not just biology, it can also be in mechanics. When I was a kid, there was a movie called The Terminator. I think they've made 74 movies since, but none of the sequels will compare to that one moment when Michael Biehn says to Sarah Connor, that Terminator is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop ever until you are dead. Check, please. Misha?
Wow, verbatim. That's amazing. Okay, the next question is from Kenzie. How did you develop Mostar?
Mostar is an amalgam of other people that I know, because everybody in the book is based on somebody. They're either a collection of different people, or they are actual people that I know. And I can tell you that Mostar is a collection of people that I know. I mean, I know one person whose personality is exactly like her. This woman is no nonsense. This woman does not have nervous breakdowns or fall into self-induced tizzies. She has survived horrible tragedies and trials and tribulations and knows how to survive. And I channeled her. She doesn't look like the Mostar in the book, but the heart, the soul, the personality, right there. And I needed Mostar. I needed her as a counterweight, because these people are the epitome of privilege. And I know in our woke society, we throw that word privilege around a lot. We use privilege for everything. And sometimes it is accurate. And sometimes it's stretching it or not entirely accurate. But these people are the distillation of privilege. They have lived in a bubble their entire lives, and they have moved to another bubble. And they have faith in systems and in everything and in the world protecting them, because the world has protected them. So why should that be different? Mostar has seen how quickly the system can collapse. And she is the warning. She is the person saying, no, 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 this is really bad. This is going to get a lot worse. And if we don't change and fight and grow and work right now, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So she was a very critical character. But I was also very lucky in my research to be able to speak to some people from the former Yugoslavia who had actually witnessed this. And these are experts in national security. I got them through my contacts in my think tanks. And they were able to give Mostar the cultural grounding that I needed for someone from this country that utterly collapsed. Because let's not forget something. We look back nostalgically at the 1990s. Most of us do. Most of this country looks back at a time of wealth and privilege, and the Cold War was over, and the historian Francis Fukuyama called it the end of history, as if, well, now the big challenges are over and it's time to move into the world of Star Trek. The end of history. Well, somebody forgot to tell the people of the former Yugoslavia. All right? So while we were dancing to Vanilla Ice and suddenly discovering that we could see naked people on our computers, this whole civilization was collapsing into violence and genocide. And Mostar is that reminder of how fragile civilization is. Misha, we got anything else?
Yes, of course we do. We have a question from Zakia. Have you watched the History Channel series Alone for inspiration or research vis-a-vis approach to
Oh,
hardship
no, you know,
and animal
no,
attack?
I've seen a little bit of Alone. I like it, but let me tell you where my wilderness inspiration comes from actually being in the wilderness a lot and doing a lot of camping and hiking, and also doing a lot of stupid stuff as a kid out in the wilderness where I totally could have died. I don't know if you ever read Into the Wild, but that kid, Chris McCandless, easily could have been me. But I will tell you that when it comes to a wilderness expert who I admire and who I have drawn upon for inspiration, that is Les Stroud. Les Stroud, if you don't know who he was and is the original wilderness survival television expert. He was the first guy to do this. He was the first guy to go into the bush with a camera by himself, because a lot of frauds and dancing bears have followed him. And those frauds go in with a camera crew. And it's all fake, it's all staged. It's called managed reality. And I know this from, I did a guest starring appearance on a reality show in which the producer told me, he goes, we don't do reality, we do what's called managed reality. Well, Les Stroud actually did and does reality. And if you've ever seen his show, like, he's failed plenty of times. He's been like, this is way too hard, and part of survival is knowing when to quit, which gave me the trust to believe in him. So I channeled him when I wrote this, and I gave him a copy of the book. And I do this a lot. I don't know why I punish myself like this, but I always give, when it's time to look for blurbs, you know, people who write nice things about the book, I always give it to the experts that I've always admired, knowing I run the risk that they could just totally just eviscerate me. Zombie book, gave it to George Romero. Praise to George Romero, who started the whole freaking genre. When I wrote the Harlem Hellfighters, I gave it to Spike Lee. And I thought, oh my God, if anyone's going to kick my ass, it's going to be Spike Lee. Well, George loved it. He loved my zombie books. Thank you. Spike Lee gave me this wonderful blurb. Oh my God, he was so nice. He was so generous. Thank you, Spike. And then I gave this book, Devolution, to Les Stroud, waiting for him to write back, well, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. He loved it. He loved it so much. We're friends now. And when this plague was happening a couple of weeks ago, he was down here shooting a documentary. He came to my house and socially distanced. And we talked from the distance and waved to each other. And he autographed a knife to me. So Les Stroud, if you don't know about him, you should. He was my wilderness inspiration. Misha?
Rosalinda asks, is there a chance we will see the Harlem Hellfighters on the big or small screen?
Oh God, I hope so. I hope so. It's an important, okay, if you don't, I'm just gonna digress for a minute. If somebody here doesn't know the story about the Harlem Hellfighters, in 1917, a unit of African-American National Guardsmen in New York signed up to fight in World War I to make the world safe for democracy. Problem was, democracy was not safe at home for African Americans, obviously, second-class citizens. And it was so bad that our own government set up these soldiers to fail because they were terrified. Our own government, our own army was so scared that if these guys went overseas to France and came home as heroes, they would inspire other Black people to, God forbid, believe in themselves and demand to be treated as equals. So our government actually set about doing everything they could to sabotage these guys. They wouldn't give them rifles. They had to write to their government pretending that they were a phony rifle club to get donated rifles. Then they were sent to South Carolina, hoping there'd be a race riot. Because if there was a race riot, the Black guys would get blamed and they wouldn't be allowed to fight. This happened 2 weeks after another race riot in Houston where the Black soldiers got blamed and weren't sent away. But they didn't fight back. You want to talk about Jackie Robinson? There was a whole regiment of Jackie Robinsons. Didn't fight back. Weren't allowed to march to war with the other National Guard units in what was called the Rainbow Division because they were told black is not a color of the rainbow. So they were sent overseas by themselves, first just being given manual labor jobs, and then finally just being given to the French. But the French needed them, and the French couldn't afford to be as racist as Americans. And these guys fought so bravely and so magnificently. They came home as one of the most dedicated units in the entire US Army. They spent more time in combat than any other unit, black or white, 191 days. They never lost a trench, never lost a man to capture. The first American of any color to win the French Croix de Guerre, which is like their Medal of Honor, was an African American named Henry Johnson from Albany, New York. I've been obsessed with this story since I was 11. I've written it as a graphic novel. I tried to write it as a movie in the 90s. I'm still trying. Will Smith's company optioned it for a while. I don't know if he's going to re-up the option. We'll see. But this story needs telling, because we can't just talk about the tragedies. We have to talk about the triumphs, because otherwise it was all for nothing. This story needs to be remembered, and it should be as commonplace as any other story in American history. So I will not give up until every American knows the story of the Harlem Hellfighters. Sorry, I didn't mean to get all passionate about it, but been doing this since I was 11.
We're here for the passion.
The next question, Misha.
Phil, for World War Z, you used the epistolary style. Frankenstein was that way too. What about this style helps you tell a parable about society?
Well, I think that's a really good way of phrasing it, because the way I look at it, the story dictates the format. The Zombie Survival Guide was a guide, so it should be a manual. It shouldn't be a novel. World War Z, how do you tell this huge story of the whole world? Because most zombie stories are like little groups of people, which I don't think is enough. I got bigger questions. So I had read a book or listened to it because of my dyslexia called The Good War by Studs Terkel, which is an oral history of World War II. I listened to that when I was a kid, and I thought, that's a great format. Oral history of the zombie war. Thank you, Studs Terkel. Boom. Harlem Hellfighters has to be visual, in my opinion, because race, skin color is about what we see. And I wanted it to be a graphic novel for many reasons, but one of the most important reasons was I never wanted the reader to forget what skin color these guys were, because these guys were never allowed to forget what color they were. So visual, graphic novel. This, I wanted to do the story of sort of the lost colony of Roanoke. Because if I did it as a straight out novel, it wouldn't have, to me, the air of mystery. And if I had done an oral history like World War Z, we would be interviewing survivors and we would know who lived and who died. So as a found journal, I thought that was the best way to keep the mystery of what really happened. Plus, I included interviews with people around the journal who were not there at the time to sort of give us background. I didn't want it just to be so cloistered. And that's why I thought the combination of the found journal and the interviews with experts gives us the whole picture. How we doing, Misha?
We're doing great. Our next question is from Marlena. Which, if any, Sasquatch novels have resonated with you, both as an author and a fan?
For me, it's not so much the Sasquatch novels as the Sasquatch movies, and because I've seen, oh my God, I must have seen, I don't know, hundreds of them. I have a wall of Sasquatch movie DVDs. The ones that were most imprinted on me are the ones from the late 70s when I was a kid. I will tell you Snow Beast, which is basically Bigfoot goes to Aspen. It's like Jaws. And that's a straight out like narrative. Like Bigfoot's killing the skiers. They don't want to close the winter carnival because it would ruin the town. And I mean, it's Jaws. It's just Jaws in the snow. Another one was Sasquatch, The Legend of Bigfoot. Terrifying, because even though I was too scared to see it in the movie theater, they played the commercials on TV. I was a little kid on the floor playing with my G.I. Joes. And then suddenly, boom, this commercial. Obviously, The Legend of Boggy Creek is another one. To me, probably the most important one is Bigfoot, The Mysterious Monsters, a faux documentary, which when you're a little kid, you don't know it's fake. You see this tall, deep-voiced, white-haired Gentile named Peter Graves proving to you that Bigfoot exists. And he goes through it like Exhibit A, the footprints. Exhibit B, the still photographs. Exhibit F, The Visions of a Psychic Detective. I didn't know a psychic detective wasn't real. I just saw him psychometrizing, which was a real word back then. I thought it was real. If you ever see, you can see it on YouTube, the Bigfoot, the Mysterious Monsters. There is a recreation, because back in the late 70s, early 80s, they used to do a lot of dramatizations or recreations. They literally had a woman sitting there at night on her couch watching TV as a giant hairy fist smashes the window and tries to get at her. I was watching this at night on the couch next to the window. So you can imagine what that did to my small little undeveloped brain. How are we doing, Misha?
We've got about 11 questions still
If
queued
you
up.
want to ask them, I'll answer them.
All right, let's do it. Jenny asks, are oceans make Earth unique in the galaxy? As an environmentalist, have you ever thought of putting your twist on a story focused on marine life or deep sea exploration?
Oh, God, yeah. Oh, my God, are you kidding? I've always loved the ocean. I mean, I don't know if you read World War Z, but one of the chapters that I really got into was fighting zombies underwater. Underwater stuff always fascinates me. As a kid, once again, it all goes back to my childhood, I saw a great documentary called Mysteries of the Sea. And I was always fascinated by the fact that we still didn't know what was down there. I love the gym suits, the pressurized suits. That's why I put them in World War Z, because they make great zombie battle armor. It was like a way of doing Starship Troopers, but underwater with real suits. If you read World War Z, I referenced just quickly the Sturge. Well, that's one of my heroes, Dr. Sylvia Earle Mead. And I watched her in this documentary walk on the bottom of the ocean in a gym suit. And I don't know, in the book, we're in the deep diving submersible, gets down to the bottom. And my character says, can't go any further unless you got a shovel. Well, that was a real quote from Mysteries of the Sea, spoken by Phil Newton, who designs surface pressure hard suits. So I gave him a huge shout out. So yeah, oh, what an amazing environment our oceans are. And by the way, we need them. We need them to survive, because if we don't have access to them, or if we poison them, we dead. Misha, another one?
Yes. Alejandro asks, what is the process of a writer when adapting his book to a movie? How much are you involved?
Honestly, buddy, it all depends on how much power you have at the time, and how much you want to be involved. Like with World War Z, I know a lot of people thought, well, he must be involved. There's a sort of weird misconception that somehow I was hanging out with Brad Pitt in the boardroom and telling him what to put in and what not to put in. I didn't even meet Brad Pitt until they were halfway through shooting the movie. That was my first real big book. I have no power, none whatsoever. And so it was up to them. And the only way to keep it pure and to exercise total control is to not do the movie deal, which means not a lot of people would have heard of my book. So I got nothing. Then when it comes to Devolution, I actually wrote Devolution originally as a movie. When you read the book, it does kind of read like a movie, because that's how I originally wrote it. I wrote it as a script. I sold it to Legendary Pictures, the folks who did Pacific Rim and the Batman movies, and oh God, what else? I mean, they've done practically every Godzilla. So I sold it to them, and they hired a writer and director. I didn't have any power back then, any mojo, and the movie never went anywhere. So then my wife said to me, you know what, you've always wanted to tell this story. Ask them for the novel rights back. So I did, and Thomas Tull, who I give the first thank you to, thank you, Thomas, he gave me the novel rights back. Now the movie's back on. Now they actually want to do Devolution, the movie, and I wrote the first draft of the script. Now, just because I write the first draft, if this goes forward, I mean, it's, who knows, but if it goes forward, I probably won't write the last draft. I mean, it's very rare that any one writer goes from start to finish in any kind of development process. They always bring on more writers. So that's the politics, the business, the economics of adapting a book to a movie. As far as the actual process, I can say that I've never actually done that, because Harlem Hellfighters started as a movie, but when I adapted it as a comic book, all I had to do was go deeper. And I can say the adaptation of that process meant a ton more research, because when you're writing a movie, you don't have to worry about like how people wear their hair or their clothes or what the weapons look like. That's the art department. If they ever make the movie, the art department will do that. The production side will do that. You don't have to do that. But when you're doing a graphic novel, that's on you. And if you want your graphic novel to be historically accurate, as I do, then I had to give myself a second job, which was to be the illustrator, Kanan White. I had to be his research assistant, because Kanan didn't have time to do that. Kanan had a lot of drawing to do. So my job was to give him all the visual materials he needed, pictures of uniforms, weapons, trenches, everything. So then Kanan could do his job and illustrate, which he did gloriously. And then back to Devolution. Started as a movie, just put it in novel form. Once again, went back and did more research, much more work. But as far as taking a book and then making it into a movie, I have yet to do that. So I'll let you know what happens if and when I ever do that.
The next from Anonymous is more of a comment, but I thought I would share it. I'm on chapter 10, loving it. Just wanted to tell you that my favorite character aspect is Dan, and how the people who are having trouble in normal society are the ones who rise to the occasion and show real grit, while the others are in crazy denial.
Thank you. No, I firmly believe that. You know, I think that millennials get a bad rap. I think that older people see them as sort of weak and helpless and arrogant and entitled and fragile. And to be totally honest, I don't blame them for that. I blame their parents, who did not teach them survival skills, who taught them that this was the end of history. They came of age in the 90s, and everybody thought, oh, not going to be any more challenges. So you won't need to fight and adapt and grow and risk and fail and recover from failure, because the world is just awesome and you're awesome, and just go out there and be awesome. Shame on my generation, shame on Gen X. But that doesn't mean that millennials or Gen X or even crusty old baby boomers can't rise to the occasion. You don't know what you're capable of unless you're given the challenge. This is actually what I say to, I made this speech countless times to the military about the post-millennials, the new generation coming up. I said, don't, and I don't say this to the military, I say this to anyone in government service. I said, get them involved. Give people a chance to show what they're made of. Don't underestimate people. Because, yeah, some people just won't rise to the challenge, but some will. And how will you know if you don't have the opportunity? And I tried to do that with Dan. Dan, who looks like this lost cause, he'd been so spoiled by his parents. He'd been so coddled and infantilized. He didn't know what he was capable of. Mostar says it. Oh, he never learned how to pick himself up because no one ever let him fall down. Well, Dan is given the chance to show what he's made of. And I firmly believe that everyone should be given that same chance. Next one, Misha.
Kenzie asks, what do you think the best lessons we should learn are from monster stories?
Honestly, I think it depends on what you're trying to tell. I mean, I think there's no one size fits all. I mean, I can tell you, like I said, for devolution, these are the lessons of devolution, as opposed to like World War Z, even though it was zombies. One of the big central lessons of World War Z was we can't be isolationist. We can't just wall ourselves off, because we're all in this together, and big problems affect everyone, and particularly Americans, because Americans, every culture, every country has things that we're good at and things we really need to work on. So like Americans, what we're really good at is adapting and growing and reinventing ourselves. I mean, and I say this to all the muckety mucks who've done TED Talks with their multiple PhDs, who poo-poo this country. I say, our last president could have been a slave of our first president. Show me another civilization in the history of the human race that has made that much social progress in that short a time. And they can't answer it. So we're really good at saying, okay, this is who we used to be. This is who we want to be. Let's go there. What we are not good at, what we still struggle with constantly, what we keep backsliding into is isolationism. This doesn't affect me. That's their problem. That's a them problem. There's no them. Not with global issues. Global issues affect us all. We all live on the globe. So I tried to talk about that in World War Z, that we need to address global issues as one species, because sooner or later, that unaddressed problem will come scratching at your door. Misha?
Marcy asks, in researching for the book, what were your best resources, not for Sasquatch, but for the human responses, how humans behave during emergencies and disasters?
Oh, well, I mean, a lot of that comes, there's two sets of how people adapt. There's what's happening in Green Loop, and then there's the wider world, like what's happening in Seattle, Tacoma. Well, what's happening there is based on all the actual research I have done over decades now about how disasters play out once you have a rolling effect of panic and systemic collapse. So there's nothing that happens there that hasn't already happened in Hurricane Katrina or the Rodney King uprising or any mega disaster. So that's all the big stuff. But the personal stuff, part of that comes from research into human psychology. How do individuals deal with crisis? Part of that comes from my father's tribe having the trauma of the Holocaust, because my dad's Jewish, I'm half Jewish, and a lot of my people went to the gas chambers because they were in denial and they didn't realize what was happening and they didn't want to know. And they thought, well, this'll pass. Just keep your head down, keep your mouth shut. We don't have to run, we don't have to fight, just deal. And eventually it'll all go away. Well, it didn't. They went away. Part of this also comes from part of the denial and also the initial fecklessness. The people in Green Loop not being able to fix a toilet or handle any problem or keep waiting for someone to save them. Well, I mean, that comes from my life. I live here in Venice Beach in Southern California. This is Silicon Beach. We're the cream of the crop. This is the elite right outside my door. The wealthy, the educated, the undefeated, as Iggy Pop would say in his song. None of them know how to do anything. They're utterly helpless. They're utterly useless. All the jobs that they think are beneath them are taken care of by people who live on the other side of town. And so you take those people away, the people who do the necessary, thankless, unglamorous jobs that keep us alive. What's going to happen to the undefeated? So a lot of it is, like I said, book learning, but a lot of it is very, very personal. Like I said, I know the people in Green Loop. Those are my people, and I know what would happen to them. Yes, Misha.
So we have about 7 questions left. You have been so generous. I'm sorry to anyone whose question isn't asked, but I want to be cognizant of your time. So the next question is related to what you just were talking about, Max. It's from an anonymous attendee. In the past, I've heard you discuss how collectively we can tackle enormous problems. For the example, World War II. Many of us in our 40s haven't been asked to change our lives to tackle a problem. Do the current responses to the crises of the present make you more or less hopeful that we can figure things out?
I'm always hopeful. I'm always hopeful because we have to be hopeful. We don't have a choice. I'm always optimistic, and I see reason for optimism all the time around me. You know, in this pandemic, our government has essentially, if this pandemic was a war, our present leadership has not only surrendered, they've joined the other side. They're literally giving aid and comfort to this invisible enemy. And yet individuals, if we use the war metaphor, are forming guerrilla bands and still fighting in a sort of Red Dawn versus coronavirus. People are still wearing masks. They're practicing social distancing. They're still listening to experts. They're believing in science. They're doing everything they can. And they are registering to vote. Because, by the way, that's one thing that we have that the Chinese didn't have. The Chinese people are the only innocents in this pandemic because they didn't have a say in this. And when this pandemic does go away, they're still stuck with the leader that let this monster out of the box. That doesn't have to be us. We can vote them out. We can throw them away and get new leaders. We have that privilege that other people from Iwo Jima to Alabama have fought and died for. So I'm very optimistic. I'm also optimistic with these current protests. You know, when it started, I thought Rodney King 2.0, people being pulled out of their cars and beaten within an inch of their life on the street, shots being fired, old scores being settled, murderous rage roiling up, because that's the nature of uprisings. They get more and more chaotic and violent and bloody as the days go on. This is the total opposite. It started off with looting, but then the protesters separated themselves from the looters and even tried to save the stores. And the protests got even more peaceful and more organized as the days went on. I mean, I like to think of myself as a fairly studied person of society and uprisings. I have almost never seen anything like that, where it's actually gotten more organized. So these protests really give me hope that we as citizens of a democratic system can come together and solve big problems.
Thank you, Max. Our next question, is there a type, from Emerson, is there a type of traditional monster that doesn't frighten you in the vein of zombies, vampires, swamp monsters? And if so, why not?
I'll tell you, I don't know why, but I've never been scared of ghosts. I mean, my attitude, I've always sort of looked at ghosts and I've always thought like, well, if I don't do anything to them, you know, they won't do anything to me. I mean, I don't know why. It never, for some reason, ghosts never tripped my ego defense mechanism, which is by the way, one of my favorite authors is Joe Hill, because I read his stuff like Heart-Shaped Box, and I thought, wow, I'm not scared of ghosts normally, and this guy scares the crap out of me. So he must be a really good writer. So that's my answer about what doesn't frighten me.
Yes, co-sign on Joe Hill. He's wonderful. And we posted him here at the Seattle Public Library when he taught for Clarion West. Our next question comes from James. In your story, it's the social elite who've chosen to live at least physically removed from the grid, though not independent of it. Could you say something about why that particular focus and what does it say about the broader society dealing with crisis? It reminds me of a sort of MTV real world rich people hideaway in World War Z. P.S. I've taught Z in my university courses on zombies and it went over super well.
Oh, good. Well, I mean, I've just talked about it before, but this notion of class, because I do think that class is very important. I think it is the driving force in why societies fight each other. I mean, race is a tool of class. One of the reasons we have racism is so rich people can divide up poor people. Because if the poor people all saw themselves as poor, regardless of the color of their skin or their ethnic background, they would realize they were all being exploited by the rich people. But rich people say, oh, no, you're actually in conflict with this person. And so you all need to fight for the scraps. Now, that's not obviously the people in Green Loop. These are not capitalist elites. These are not exploiters. They're just living in a bubble. But they are part of a society that has what I think is a skewed sense of value. You know, I am a firm believer in education. I'm not anti-intellectual. I believe that we should have robust, powerful, free education in this country to lift everyone. But I think there are people who study one type of education at the expense of another. I think that in this country, we look down on people who work with their hands, who don't have a college degree, which is prejudice. And the truth of the matter is, people who have the traditional, what we would call blue collar, a lot of times they make a hell of a lot more money than people with college degrees who sit in an office all day and do nothing and contribute nothing and help no one, as opposed to the people who keep our water treated when we flush our poo, who make sure the water that comes out of our tap is safe to drink, the people who put out our fires, the people who fix our homes. They're here in the hierarchy, whereas the people who study for a living, including me, are up here. And I think that there should be room for everybody, but I think there must be also an appreciation of everyone. And I've seen that. I've seen this notion of class. I talk about it in World War Z, the idea they have to retrain everybody because half the people in LA don't know how to do anything. I saw that in New York when I lived there, in the Hamptons, where the rents were going up so high that all the plumbers and electricians and people who make society run, they couldn't afford to live in the Hamptons. They had to move out of town. I think that we need to have a more inclusive respect for who does what, because everybody matters, no matter what your job title is. Misha?
We have 4 final questions. One is from Alex. In Zombie Survival Guide, you recommend the Shaolin Spade as the ideal defense against zombies. Is this the weapon that you showed us? And is it the ideal weapon?
No. Oh God, don't use that on a zombie. No, this is a soba. This is a sobakiri. This is a cleaver that's made to chop buckwheat into soba noodles. This is just bamboo and wire from a lamp. So no. This, I would not encourage you to, because if you chop more than just a few heads, it seems, I don't know how well it's going to stand up. No, the Shaolin Spade is a great weapon. It's a great weapon for zombies. But if you're just talking about a standard weapon that everybody can use, I would choose the machete. And don't ask why I happen to have one in my desk, and this is one of the best. It's got the steel goes all the way down. It's called full tang. It's got good rivets. It was not made to be cool. It was not made to be a toy. It was not something that young men could put up on their wall and stare at lovingly, like the guy who decapitates himself in the Sausage Party. This was an army machete from the 60s and 70s that was meant, like any other tool, to be used a lot. Next question.
Machete, just at the ready. Excellent.
Okay.
Liv asks, did you find anything compelling in your research to make you believe that Sasquatch exist?
Yes and no. I am still one of those weird, fringy Americans who still believes in science and evidence. So when I see a carcass, when someone presents a bone, something with DNA, something that can be carbon dated and tested, when I see the proof, I will believe in Sasquatch, and not until then. However, in my research studying Gigantopithecus, I discovered that there is no scientific reason that Sasquatch could not live, that a species of great apes could not live in the Pacific Northwest. And speaking to all of you, you know this. You know how much wilderness there is out there. You know how good the cover and concealment is. You also know how plentiful the food is. My God, when I started, I've been vacationing up there for 10 years. And I remember the first time I went up there, I thought, oh my God, because I live in a desert. I realized this really is a land of plenty. Oh my God, you could pack on the calories up here if you had to. So there is no scientific reason why a great ape could not survive and thrive in the ecosystem of the Pacific Northwest. That is what I have concluded from my research into Sasquatch.
All right, Nicole asks, Batman or Superman? LOL.
Depends on what? It depends on the situation. For me, I will go with Superman because it's very personal. Because when I was younger, and my son, who's now 15, he was very little. He was very cute. And I showed him Superman for the first time. And he wasn't really into the special effects and the old 70s Superman, Christopher Reeve. He was not into that as much as he was mesmerized by Jor-El's monologue when he puts little Kal-El in the rocket ship and holds up the crystal. And my son did that. And he held up a little peg from his light bright. Remember when Jor-El goes, "He will never be alone." He did that. Little Henry goes, "He will never be alone," into the light bright. And when Jor-El says, "You will travel far, my little Kal-El," he then turned to the dog and said, "You will walk like a dog, my little dog." So for us, father and son, Superman is a very important part of our family.
The final question of the evening comes from Anonymous. What are you going to write about next?
I don't like to tip my hat. I say that. I mean, and that's not being arrogant or anything like that. But I will say that I'm very superstitious about my writing. I don't, not as much an insecurity as just a notion of like, what if I never finish it? What if I give up on it? What if it sucks and I don't like it and I don't think it's good enough for public consumption? So I don't tell people, even when I'm writing, even when I'm researching, like when I was talking to some of these scientists, you're going to see in the acknowledgments of devolution, a lot of people's that I thanked. I would say 99% of them had no idea what I was writing about when I spoke to them about this. I mean, part of it was I was afraid of the Sasquatch bias. Like I'm talking to real scientists. And I didn't want to be like, "Hey, I'm writing a Bigfoot book." They'd be like, "Oh, okay," click and hang up the phone. Instead, I was like, I'm writing a novel and the catalyst is Rainier's eruption. Could we talk about Rainier's eruption? But some people, I just didn't talk about it. There was only a few people, close friends from the Pacific Northwest, by the way. I won't say who, but there's a guy and a girl, very close family friends, who we vacation with up there for years. Our families are close. Our kids are close. He's from one side of the Cascades. She's from the other. And they knew because I've been talking about this for years, and they were like, "You got to write this." But most people, no idea. And as a matter of fact, unlike a lot of other writers, I don't even get an advance for a book that I haven't already written. Because I know some writers, they go to a publisher and they say, "Here's my idea," and they say, "Well, here's the money, go write it." I write it. And that's every book, even Minecraft. And then I get the deal. Then I show it. I don't show people pages. I don't show people chapters. Boom. Here's at least a workable draft. That's how I write. So I wish I could tell you, "Hey, everybody, tune in for my next book." I'll let you know when it's done.
Well, would you entertain one last question, since
Yeah.
you couldn't quite tell them that one, understandably? Tina asks, are you surprised that there hasn't been more societal breakdown as the initial reaction to current COVID-19 global pandemic, as is often depicted in a lot of books and movies?
Yes. Oh my God. Are you kidding? I was convinced when the initial fist fights over toilet paper, when people started to hoard toilet paper, I kept saying to my wife, like, here we go. This is it. Because I've seen society break down. When the Rodney King riots happened, they rocked all of America. So that was terrifying. So I was ready for it to be much, much worse. But I have been blessedly wrong, even in these present protests. When the Rodney King riot started, within a few days, 55 people dead in Los Angeles. This time around, 0. I'm shocked when people come together and do the right thing. And so even with COVID-19, I mean, millions, tens of millions of people are out of work. And when everything reopens, even when we get a vaccine and people go back for their jobs may not be there. things may get worse. They might. We might have some real breakdowns in the future because this is a long-term problem. So I'm not saying we're out of the woods. We're barely in the woods. But I am hopeful because I've seen goodness everywhere. You know, from the protesters who are disciplined and decent and try and keep the peace, even when their anger is volcanic. You know, I've seen this in people who've lost their jobs and go out of their way to help other people. I see this when everybody puts on a mask, which are hot and uncomfortable in summer, but people do it, not because they're afraid of themselves, because they don't want to hurt other people, because it's the right thing to do. And I've seen a lot of people doing the right thing in the worst times. And so cynics can be cynical all they want about the times we're living in, but I see this current moment in history as a great example for hope.
Well, what a beautiful way to wrap that up, Max. Thank you so much. There is a comment that came in at the end. Someone here tonight wanted to thank you and your dad for hours of entertainment.
I will tell my dad. We both thank you.
Well, thank you again. Just to remind everyone, there are signed copies available at Elliott Bay Book Company. You can get them available to ship right to your home, download, or curbside pickup at www.elliottbay.book.com. I want to thank the Seattle Public Library Foundation, the Seattle City of Literature, Penguin Random House for making this event possible. And Max, do you have any final words?
You know, just keep reading. If not my book, read somebody else's. And please, please support our libraries, because as a student of history, I will tell you that if anything will save us from societal collapse, it are libraries. Our libraries are the beacons in the night. They are the fires that will keep us warm in the coldest winters. Societies that have burned their libraries are on the speedway to decline. So protect them, use them, celebrate them.
Well, thank you so much, Max Brooks, for joining us tonight in Seattle virtually, and we hope to have you back in person when it is safe to do so. And everyone go out and read Devolution.
I look forward to seeing you in person. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay, good night.